curtain. Today I'm going to teach you how to write an essay. I'm not Welsh, and that was shocking, but I've just been watching Gavin and Stacey on Facebook, so I feel like that's probably why I did that. Looking ghastly pale. Excuse me, like, I think I'm actually paler than the wall. Summer cannot come quick enough, excuse me. Cannot wait to move abroad and just soak up the sun. I think the tops also probably not really do make Vegas, but whatever. Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a study related video because I feel like you guys actually really like those, and I think that sometimes us study tubers do forget to film them, and I was like, look, I've realised that I've done a video on how to write an English essay, but I feel like I could just do a video on how I write my essays, because out of everything that I do in my degree, like translation, grammar, speaking, whatever, the literature essays are my strongest point, and that is kind of where I got the best grades in my prelims, and I just feel like I've got a process that works. Obviously, that is not me saying that every essay I write is perfect, because they're not. In fact, the one I got back yesterday said that I need to use more textual evidence because it was rather abstract, which is so fair because I wrote it in 4 hours, which was really probably not the best idea. But anyway, basically what I'm trying to say is I obviously don't think that every one of my essays is perfect. I'm still learning, I'm still growing. I just thought I'd go through like the process that I take from the moment I get given the question to when I hand it in. And I also think that it's worth saying, obviously for A-level and GCSE there are set mark schemes and stuff. At Oxford, and at uni just in general, really, like I feel like it's more just like you create your own mark scheme in your head, and each tutor will probably mark things differently as well, but this is just a general process that you can follow, as it were. So usually I write like 1 to 2 essays a week, but they're like 2,500 words, and you have to read 2 or 3 books for them, and you also have to do the critics. But basically what will happen is I'll get the question or questions. Sometimes I get given a singular question. For Spanish I usually get a singular question, whereas for German I'll get like 8 questions. If I have to pick, I will pick straight away while I'm at uni, just because I don't have a lot of time to be doing the reading, and as much as I would love to read all about the text and everything about it, if I pick a question then I can read like specifically tailored to that question. So if you already know your question, I would recommend reading as much as you can like tailored in that way. Obviously you need to know like everything about the topic for the actual exam, but that's something you can do as part of your revision, whereas if you're running tight on time, there's no point in wasting time like reading things and articles and books and stuff that are not actually directly relevant to the question, as interesting as they may be, because they might be interesting. I don't know, I don't know your subject, but yeah, so the first thing I will do is pick my question, and I write it at the top of a Word document, and I will put in bold the keywords. Let's go for this one because this was my best essay that I've written all year, so I feel like this is a good one to go for because I feel like it's like it went well. So what I will do is I'll write the title at the top of a landscape document, and this one was: the clue to what makes Cervantes' fiction mysterious and provocative can be found in the gaps between what is conventional and what is not. So I underlined mysterious and provocative, and I put in brackets next to it, focus on this, because if you've got keywords like that, they need to be in like every paragraph, like to make sure that you're answering the question. And then I also highlighted gaps, because I was like, what does this mean? Gaps? Question mark? Like what? So this is kind of what my critical reading document looks like. I used to do it I used to do it where I would just put the title of the article that I'm reading, and then I'd just annotate underneath and put my page numbers in brackets. Always put your page numbers down, people, because when it comes to referencing critics or articles or studies, if you have not put the page number next to the quote, you're going to hate yourself later. Like, seriously. But I watched Jack Edwards' video where he did it in a table, and I actually feel like a table works way better. So if you want to watch Jack Edwards' video on how he like does reading for an essay, he does it a lot neater than I do, I won't lie to you. So I'll link that down below. Mine is very ad hoc. Like, I'm a bit lazy with it, to be honest, but generally it's like article name, quote from article, or just piece of information, page number, and then any other extra information, like if it's from another critic. You know when you read an article from a critic and then it's from another critic within the article, so you need to make sure that you don't quote the original person, you quote the person. So like that's what that's for. But yeah, that's how I tend to do it. So I always put it in a colour because I'm just like, I feel like it just makes things more fun, you know, when you're sat in the library wanting to tear your hair out. So this was this week's reading. I think it depends on how much reading you want to do. For me personally, because I usually have read the books like rather quickly over the back, like the reading is kind of what forms the backbone of my essay, and I just need a little push in the right direction of like what I'm actually doing. But for some people, they prefer to write based on their own opinions. But for me, I just find having that background of like critical discourse really gives me room to form my own opinion within the, like, say if it's like an issue that's quite controversial, you can like find where you sit in that and also be aware where like all the critics sit. Obviously, if you're doing something like psychology or you're doing something where you're just citing studies, then the reading is obviously necessary. For literature, it's a bit more like, is it necessary? I don't really know. But yeah, so that's basically how I start. So this will take me around 24 hours. So my essays are due on a Tuesday lunchtime, but I have classes all day Tuesday. So they're essentially due Monday evening at some point. And so usually, I didn't do this last week, I actually did it all on the Monday. Would not recommend to a friend. I was at my desk / on my bed working for 14 hours. 14. And it wasn't even a good essay, but whatever. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. So usually I will dedicate a day to the reading. So I will go to the library and I will get some books out, example pending. So usually what I do is we have a reading list. So they'll give us like a set list of books that they think are specifically really useful, and naturally those will be the ones that I'll go to first. But the beauty of a library is that when you go to fetch the books that are like the ones that they've recommended, they will also have lots of other books too. Do you know what I mean? So they'll all be in the same section. So for last week, just for reference, I didn't read all of these. Okay, like let's just say that for a hot second now. I went and got all of these ones, and I'd say about 3 of these were like the recommended books, and the rest of them were ones that I thought, oh, this looks interesting. Like this one, I was like, oh, I didn't read it, but I was like, this looks like it could potentially be good. This was a set book. This one just liked the colour of the cover, to be honest. And then you actually have more books than you need, because sometimes there's nothing worse than going to the library and getting that book that you think is going to be useful and it's useless, and then you're like, well, that's a waste. But also, if your university or school has like access to JSTOR or has access to, you know, like it has like a library, an online library thing. So what I can usually do is I can type in the name of the text on Google Scholar. It's great if you guys have not used Google Scholar, or you can type it in on your university's like library function, and you can find other articles online from like periodicals and journals. And this week I went home for the weekend and I didn't bring my books with me, so all of the reading I did was online. And often, can I just be honest with you here, reading online is so much more fun. A, because you can just copy and paste it into a table, so you don't have to type it out, and B, because it's just an article, it's not a book. So yeah, that's basically like how I go about sourcing my reading generally. So it's like reading lists is obviously there for a reason, but if something's not useful to the essay question, then just skirt past it, you know what I mean? And B, like use your initiative. Like my tutor always says that he really likes that I go and read other things, and to be honest, I just read them because they look interesting. And okay, I'm not condoning this, but I also am, because honestly, like, it makes you look so much more intelligent. If you read an article that's quoted a critic, use that critic as well, and like then when you cite that critic, it's like you've read 2 critics' articles when you've actually only read 1. Or just read the abstracts and conclusions of things if you're really short on time, and then just find like a useful quote in the middle. Like, you know, be smart with your time, people, like be smart. So yeah, like I'll generally just tend to read as much as I feel like I have time for, and what I do when I go through is I'll type my notes into that table that I just showed you, and if there's a critic's quote that I feel like is really, like, it's a good one, I'll make it bold and underlined, so that when I'm scrolling back through them, I'm like, oh, that one stands out, or I must have thought that that was useful for the question. So that's basically what I do in terms of reading. Like, it depends on the week, how much effort I'm feeling, like how much I like the question. But I tend to read like maybe like 2-3 articles and like 2-3 books, but some weeks I'll just read 2. Like, it literally depends, however much you feel like you want to. And whilst I'm doing that, I have a separate document open, and I just put essay plan at the top. And as I'm going, if I'm noticing like common points in the reading, then I'll start to like just transfer my ideas onto this essay plan sheet, right? Like, it doesn't have to be coherent, it can literally just be like, oh, potential point, question mark, this, or or would this be a good counter argument? And just go copy and paste any, or type any ideas that you have onto the sheet. It does not have to have any structure whatsoever. And if there's any critics quote that you think, oh my god, this absolutely slaps, must be used in essay, then I copy and paste that over as well. I can't show you what that looks like because it turns into the essay eventually, so I can't really show you, but imagine just like a page full of like question mark ideas and stuff. So once I've done my reading, I think usually by that point I have a pretty clear idea of the strains of argument that are kind of surrounding the question in critical thinking, and usually you'll read something and that will just trigger something in your brain and you start to come up with ideas, right? So at this point, I'll go back to this sheet where I've just dumped loads of information on, and I will start to organise it into categories or points, if you will. So anything that I think would be a good sort of introductory thing, so any context perhaps, any like critics quotes that are kind of more broad. So for example, in this week's essay, I remember reading one where they said that the text has a lack of any meaningful content, and I was like, that's such a good introductory quote, because then I can just spend the rest of the essay saying why it does have meaningful content. Yeah, so in my essay this week, it's like my introductions mainly like context and things like that, and that all came from like just the reading, so that's what I put there. And then I put paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4 in brackets. I tend to write 4, I won't lie. I always just find myself writing 4, but I always find that point 1 takes 2 paragraphs, second paragraph and a sub-paragraph. Does that make sense? So I'll have like 3 points, but my first point sometimes is like has 2 strands to it. But yeah, so I'll write paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, paragraph 4, and then I'll start to like fill in my overarching arguments, which tend to come to you by this point. And if you're really struggling, then just put the ones in that you have, and you vibe it and you just carry on as like things will come to you as you carry on. So once I've done that, then I will put all of the relevant critics bits that I've found into those categories. And then what you need to do obviously is like find some examples from the text that you're going to use in that paragraph, which is my weak point. I will admit to you, a lot of the time I'll just start writing and I'll just find them as I go along, which you shouldn't do. You should find them as you go, like as you're making your plan. So what you do is you've got your critics bit, you've got your critics opinion, then you find your examples from the text, and make sure you put the page number next to it so that when you come to write, this is just as easy as possible. And then what I tend to do then is like order it all into the way that I want to argue it, and just add in sort of any other little things that you want to mention. My essay plans are very like ad hoc. They probably only make sense to me, but so by this point you should have 4 paragraph points and examples and critics quotes or critics arguments, and your own sort of like basically the angle that you're going to take in the paragraph. Once I've done that, then it's time to get groovy and write the essay. I tend to do this on a separate day because I feel like sometimes I just need to like leave it. In terms of how I argue my essays, this is kind of what people always ask me. They're like, how do you like write an essay that's convincing? And I have a formula that I stick to more or less every single week now, and it works a treat, to be honest. It works absolutely marvelously, and it always seems to get me praise. So I'm going to tell you what that is, obviously, because that's what this video is for. So basically, I'll do my introduction. My introduction will always just have contextual info in, just things that make you sound more intelligent than you actually are. So just, you know, referencing other, I don't know how to explain. So for this week, for example, we were talking about social comedy, so kind of like, you know, like Shakespeare's funny comedies but in Spanish. And so I was basically like situating social comedy within the context of the period. So I was like, you know, there are other types of literature. So I was talking about Neo-Stoic literature, Platonic, like Petrarchan sonnets, whatever, like basically trying to contrast and compare them with those, just to put them where they are. I'll always put a critic's quote in the introduction, because I usually put one in that I thoroughly disagree with, because then I can spend the rest of the essay proving why it's not true. And yeah, and then at the end of the introduction I'll always say like, in this essay, or this essay will endeavour to explore how X author presents X issue in X text, like just to make sure that I basically just summarise my my argument. So in this essay, for example, it says, through exploration of through exploration of Teresa de Molinas, Don Gil de las Calzas Verdes y no, and, not E, wow, wrong language, Madre Piadosa, this essay will explore the power to be found in the parochial, be it in solace and escapism, or as an insight into human idiosyncrasies. There is often just as much to be gained in their viewing as their more erudite literary counterparts. And that there is the crux of my argument. Always put the crux of your argument in your introduction. Basically, you need to say what you're going to say, because if you don't, the reader's going to have no clue what they're, like, how they're supposed to follow this argument. So that's the number one tip for the introduction. In terms of how I do my points, I will generally, I just grabbed my hips and just realised how much chub there is there. That was not fun. I will generally start by agreeing with the question. I think that sometimes it's just better to do that. It's better to start, because 9 times out of 10 I will disagree with the question. So I'll start with the point being like, you know, first and foremost, it's important to look at the ways that it does agree with the question in terms of like, so this week it was like, oh, basically social comedies just deal with trivial matters. And for once I actually agreed. But I was like, you know, the events in social comedies are most definitely grounded in the trivial, the mundane, the everyday. And then I'll write a paragraph about that. Trying to look at it from both sides, but, you know, trying to make my point convincing. So I'll start by laying down my main argument, then I'll put some examples in from the text, then I'll probably put the critics in at the end, and then just sort of say what I think about the critics. It's always important to say what you think about critics, people. Do not, under any circumstances, just whack a critic's quote in and not analyse it in some way. Whether you agree with it or disagree with it, fine, but even if you literally just put, as the critic rightly states, just make sure you're making your standpoint clear. Otherwise, it's just a random quote from a random geezer in the middle of your essay, and that's not what you want. My second paragraph will usually kind of be an elaboration of my first one, because I usually find that my first point tends to merit a little bit more discussion than everyone else, because it's got like the bulk in. So in this essay, I was saying, yes, okay, these plays are definitely very trivial. I agree with the question, and the first paragraph is just showing all of the trivial matters that it deals with, how it's grounded in, you know, the everyday life, basically. And my second paragraph, rather than like going straight to disagreeing, I basically went, so if they are trivial, we can't just be like, yep, they are trivial. We have to say why. Why has the author, why has the playwright decided to make this trivial? And then I just explored the reasons behind my first point. So don't be afraid to stretch a point out over 2 paragraphs. It doesn't need to be a situation of you have 3 points and they're all like, you know, they're all different in their own right. The same goes for this essay. So I was essentially arguing, right, Facebook, would you like to just be quiet for a hot second there? This essay is essentially about literary convention. So my first point was basically talking about literary convention and how, you know, how he's dealing with literary convention, basically, and how a lot of his texts do pay tribute to literary convention. My second point was not, like, I was talking about language and plot structure in the first one, and then in the second one I was like, but also we can look at it on the level of characterization. So it's the same point but just from a slightly different angle. Does that make sense? It's really hard to explain without like going into the specific issue of the essay, but this is basically what I mean. And then my third point will often just be a basic disagreement with the question, or a basic agreement if I've started by disagreeing, but whatever. It will just sort of look at it from another perspective. So this one, for example, as I've been saying, you know, I was talking about convention, like literary convention, and then I was like, but discussion of convention does not need to be limited to the realm of genre. However, we can also look at it through the convention of literary theory. So I was like, look, what about this? Like, another angle. And the same in this one. So in this one I was basically saying that all the way through I was making contrasts in my first 2 paragraphs between tragedy, which often deals with very like hefty issues like death and like the nature of life and all of this stuff, and comedy that tends to restrict itself more to the realm of the mundane. And then I basically just was like, but we need to be careful. So everything that I've argued this far, okay, I've argued it very convincingly, but I'm just going to pull the rug out from under that and basically completely question everything I've just said. So I was like, but the line between tragedy and comedy is perhaps not as clear cut as this question seems to think. Basically just yeet the principle that you've been arguing so far and turn it completely on its head and go, actually, Why don't we look at it from a completely bit different perspective that's not even a agree disagree, it's just a, does this question even make sense in the first place? Does that make sense? I feel like it kind of doesn't. So basically, you have your agreeing and your disagreeing points, whatever you decide to do. But for me, the creme de la creme, and I think the reason that I always do well in essays is that my final paragraph will always be just a completely alternative argument that completely questions not only what you've said, but also the parameters of the question. So it makes the person who's set the question think, wait, was this even a, should I even have asked this question? Like, is it even a question? Basically just completely rip the question to shreds. So in this essay, for example, when it's talking about the gaps between convention and non-convention. So this essay is talking about convention, right? So I talk about all the different types of convention, like literary convention, conventions of literary criticism, whatever. And then in the final one, I'm like, but, you know, what even is a convention? You know, what is the nature of convention? How do we define a convention? And what are these so-called gaps between what is conventional and non-conventional? Either something's conventional or it's not, right? So then I basically was just like, bam! To my tutor, what even is a convention? And he was like, I really like that part of your essay, because I was like, wait, hold on. We need to stop and think. You need to have a final point that will make people stop and think, basically. Basically, if you can't drop the mic at the end of your essay and walk out, you've not argued it convincingly enough. I think there's definitely beauty in, you know, just agreeing and disagreeing to a point, but I always find that if you save your sort of more alternative point to the end of the essay, it really does impress a tutor or an examiner, because you're basically kind of undoing the question. And I think that if you know the question well enough that you can question the very nature of the question, that's actually a really good sign that you are very familiar with the text that you're reading, which I think is always a really good thing to do. It's essentially a case of carefully constructing an argument and constructing both sides in your first few points, and then finally just putting something in there that questions both of those and questions the very nature of the argument itself. That's not necessarily showing that you don't understand the argument and that you feel like what you've argued so far isn't valid. It's merely offering the reader a perspective that will make them think and will make them question whether this debate is even worth having or whether it's the correct debate to be having, essentially. Lots of conclusions. You've heard this a million times before. Just don't write what you wrote in your introduction, in your conclusion, and don't just summarise the points that you've made. I always save a little something to the end for the conclusion, be it a critic's quote or, I don't know, like just some sort of point that will leave it on a high, because I do think sometimes the momentum of the essay, like, you can kind of wear yourself down, and by the end, like, your arguments are kind of skating a little bit on thin ice. But I think there is definitely beauty in just saving something, like a little provocative little something, like right till the end. So in this essay, for example, I've spoken all about these beautiful labyrinths of conventions that Cervantes creates. At the end, I basically said, is that a bad thing? So I say, although this labyrinth of different meanings and possible interpretations may mean that we never truly discern what, I'll translate, hidden mystery, lies at the heart of Cervantes' work, one cannot help but feel that this was precisely what he intended. And that then is a nice little way to end it, you know what I mean? Like, it's a little like, oh, it's ended with, you know, when you read something, you're like, oh, that's just ended really nicely, just with a little food for thought, as it were. And in this one, I said, whilst exploration of issues beyond man's immediate existence can be enlightening, there's much to be said for the benefits of drama that can offer both respite and entertainment away from these pertinent debates. So you've got this like nice little, I do love a although sentence at the end, or a while. So you say, whilst I've argued this in this essay, and whilst, yes, this may be a point, you know, there's much to be said for doing things quite the other way. And then you just sort of slide away and you're like, okay, goodbye. Bye then, you know? You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's nice to just sort of leave them on a little bit of a, I've wrapped up my argument, but is it really wrapped up? So I hope you enjoyed this video. I don't know, honestly, if this has made a lot of sense. I've tried to explain my brain in a way that makes sense, because that's just how I've always written essays, and so I think sometimes I feel like it makes more sense in my head than it does out loud. But to summarise, it's basically just a case of try and always question what's in front of you. If you're given a question, and unless it's something like, oh, examine the portrayal of, you can't really question that. But if it's something, it's a statement, definitely argue for and against the statement, and definitely, you know, develop your points. But by the same token, there is no like shame, or actually like it's actually very good if you are capable of deconstructing that question and actually pointing out the flaws in the statement. So if a statement's, I don't know, like I'm trying to think of a statement that's like really easy to, okay, yeah. So for example, an essay that I had a couple of weeks back was basically saying that the Picaresque novel, which is kind of like, you know, like basically like Huckleberry Finn and like that in English, reveals a self, and then there's a lot of the rest of the statement. But my essay was basically like, what even is the self? Like the self is an ever-changing entity. Like your self-perception is different to the self that you project to other people, is different to yourself when you were younger, is different to a self written on the page versus a self in real life. So my essay basically was like, I actually just don't even agree that the question like has merit to be answered, because in order to answer it, a self would have to be a fixed being, because the actual question was not about the existence of a self. It was presupposing that a self existed, basically. And I was like, you can't do that. Like, you can't just say that there's one thing. So basically the rest of the statement is pointless unless there's a fixed self, which there isn't. Does that make sense? No, okay, I keep saying does that make sense? You know what I mean? But yeah, just try and question everything that's there in front of you. And I found in prelims, that's basically what I did. I just literally said, sorry, I just don't really agree with this question. And not only do I not agree with the statement, I just feel like the statement makes no sense anyway. Obviously, sometimes they are just legitimate statements, and I'm not trying to like slag off the critics that have written the statements. It's more just a case of showing that you've got that critical ability to argue against somebody and render that argument a moot point, essentially. So if you enjoyed this video, do give it a big thumbs up. If it didn't make any sense and it wasn't that helpful, then be sure to leave some questions down in the comments and I'll try and be a bit more legible in the comments. But yeah, it was lovely to talk to you about it. It was lovely to talk to you. I'm sorry, who am I? Anyway, I'll see you. Right, I just need to stop talking now. I'll see you very soon with a new video. Bye guys. Mwah.